Good evening, everybody. I'm Joel Hicks. I'm the chair of the Climate Action Committee. It is just a little after 6, call to order the April 5th, 2022 Climate Action Committee. And our first order of business, I move that the Executive Committee review and approve the November 30th, 2021 minutes. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Tony Underwood. And any discussion? Hearing none. Call the question. All those who approve, all those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye. All those opposed? The ayes have it. The November 30, 2021 minutes are approved. Thank you for that. And I'll just add, for those who are keeping score at home, you might be wondering why we're approving the November 30th, 2021 minutes. Upon executive committee, but we felt it would be worth having a what we call a steering group to streamline the recommendations and the specific plans and subset of the plans that required borough commitments. And so that was, I think we have a process in place that will allow the mission and the work of the committee to kind of move forward in a logical fashion. I'll just say if you look around and look at how different municipalities sort of approach climate action planning, you're going to find a very non-homogeneous approach. Every municipality sort of approaches this a different way. I'm optimistic this is going to work well for us, and I appreciate all the work that the borough manager and the mayor and deputy mayor did to make that happen. So thanks for indulging that, kind of getting us up to date. And I'd like to open up for public comment. I don't know if we have somebody who wants to comment, or thank you for being here. Is there anyone online? Joyce? There's okay. Moving on, I think I went ahead and just did a little bit of my introductory remarks preceding the public comment. So before I proceed to item B, I wanted to, I had been asked by the borough manager, or passed along from the borough manager her thanks. She had attended the climate justice teach-in and had heard some really interesting and informative things that I think we have a few members here to thank for, from the deputy mayor, but also to the community engagement team lead who is joining us right now, and to Carla Farrell for kind of educating the public on the work we're doing, and really allowing allowing us to keep our work in the forefront of what this is going to be years, decades long project to meet our goals. So we have to keep that in the forefront of take every opportunity we can to engage with the public. So personal thank you to Mitch, to Brenda, to Carla, and then anyone I missed who was there as well. But borough manager really wanted to make sure that was acknowledged. As we were adjourning the creation, the commission that created the climate action plan, one of the things that was approved when version 1.0 was taken on was the idea to focus our initial efforts as we go now into the implementation phase is to take a subset of the projects or objectives we had identified and do what we call a deep dive on those, which, as far as the one members who are on the task force here, that means we're going to be developing a schedule and implementation plan with what I call sort of the details for execution, that will culminate in actionable recommendations, and that will be a series of things that will range from, perhaps capital investments, range from changes in our ordinance, community education, all the elements that have to come together to realize that objective. So those are spread across our different task forces, which I'd like to introduce. Let me start by introducing the task force with our newest lead and the newest member of our executive committee is Dr. David Sheridan, who is heading our transportation task force. We welcome him. And David, would you like to say anything and introduce yourself? And it's the first time a lot of people have probably seen your face.
Thanks, Joel. I'm a civil engineer, recently retired from the U.S. Green Building Council, and live on West Baltimore Street, and I've been a resident of Carlisle since 2006, and I'm looking forward to helping, particularly in the area of transportation.
Thank you, David. David is meeting with his task force, and the initial focus will be two objectives. I'll just read them for those who haven't been keeping track, but to promote the adoption of electric vehicles by households and businesses, to achieve 30% of the light duty fleet by 2035 and 90% by 2050. And the second objective is focused on reducing community vehicle miles traveled by 10% by 2035 and 25% by 2050. As you might imagine, that involves thinking about things like ride sharing and other providing safe and convenient alternatives to internal combustion engine travel on our roadways. So portions of that we have modeled with our pathways and analytics team, but that the actual plans to implement and achieve those objectives are now in the early stage of development. I look forward to in subsequent meetings to have David put more meat on those bones with his task force, and hopefully have something to put in front of council to start acting on in the near future. I will add that I think one of the reasons why that particular topic has a bit of urgency is the level of fundings and certainly the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which set aside $7.5 billion for EV infrastructure. We are in a municipality that should be highly competitive for those funds being bisected by a major interstate. We have all of the characteristics of a community that should be very, very competitive for federal and state funds for EV infrastructure. So that needs to be in our boresight, and I look forward to. We have a collaboration with Dickinson College to help us think through, and their results will be provided to David and his team, who are going to look at some alternatives, do a pretty good policy analysis scrub that I think will be very beneficial to your team, and I am appreciative of the time that faculty members at Dickinson, and especially the students who are very, very eager to contribute to our implementation plans. I look forward to sharing that as they wrap up their work. So that was two of the 6 projects. The next 3 are actually in a task force called Decarbonization Task Force, which at the moment we have a vacancy for. So if you are interested in leading this task force, we would love to consider your application. There are 3 projects that are being focused on. The first is to pursue warehouse solar installations. There is not a specific target for that, other than a recognition that, again, due to some of the unique features of where we're located relative to these types of commercial entities, there are a lot of favorable reasons to look at warehouse roofs as good candidates for collecting solar power that I think even potentially, if Harrisburg can resolve the differences they have now and allowing community solar to be delivered to communities, that we have a real potential win-win situation with leveraging warehouses to help us meet our decarbonization goals. We also have a target of electrification and fuel switching to reduce the use of fossil fuel, fossil gas, fossil oil, propane by switching to electricity and or renewable gas. My guess is that is going to be an ongoing. I can't see us putting a bow on that particular objective in the next year or two, but that's going to be an ongoing thing. Let's give you an example of what we're talking about. Obviously, a lot of our space heating and cooking is done right now with methane and natural gas. We have a pretty extensive distribution system for delivering that fuel. Eventually, it's the burning of the methane will need to be using those existing lines need to be replaced by a less greenhouse gas intensive fuel. So there's a lot of work. There's a lot of discussion about burning hydrogen. The compatibility of using existing methane infrastructure to transport other types of gases that are less harmful. So that's one example of what would kind of fit well under fuel switching. And then the third main objective is transition to 100% renewable energy consumption at all borough facilities by 2050. That in some ways that might be the easiest to achieve effectively. Just so everybody knows, the borough is under a electricity procurement program that does procure all of its energy right now from renewable sources. Now, that is not a permanent contract, so we can't quite check that box off, but it is a good indication, that we are committed to doing that. And we've looked at feasibility of supporting solar installations on the facilities we own here in the borough to see if that might be a cost-effective option. We're not at the point of being able to invest in that capital project that would be cost-effective yet, but there's a lot of regulations. There's a lot the prices of solar power coming down. There are a lot of factors that could change that reality in the future. So suffice it to say, we could achieve that with a combination of approaches, and I look forward to working with Jared and his department to make sure we can meet that target. And then our energy efficiency and behavior task force that is led by Carla Farrell, who was our zoning lead, has, I think, in some ways, one of the more expansive projects to consider is to retrofit 40% of existing residential homes into energy efficiency programs by 2035. So that's a pretty generic requirement as to what an energy efficiency program is, but still getting, and then 70% by 2050, but getting 40% of homes to do anything as sort of simple as maybe some weatherization or insulation to something more sophisticated like a complete replacement of their HVAC system, those sorts of things. But I know that, having spoken with Carla, she's got some really great ideas that I think will be a tremendous reduction in our energy intensity, but also have I'm convinced, some really positive economic impacts, especially the low income and folks who struggle when they don't really have a lot of agency to make changes in the places they live. So I think that that's probably going to be central to what her team is working on in the early stages. So I took you through a little journey of those 6 projects, that is not to say the task force leads don't have the ability to make some progress on some of our other objectives, which I would encourage you to check out on our website. But those will be the focus, at least in the next 12 months. And that's actually a nice. I talked a little bit about some other factors that are important to what the work we're doing that isn't strictly about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The decisions we put forward, the considerations we make of the projects we move forward is about a lot of factors, and we're cognizant of that. And our community engagement team lead, Mitch Shiles, has done a lot of really good thinking with his team about some of those criteria that we'll use when we consider an approach. And if Mitch is ready to talk a little bit about them, I would love to turn the floor over to him.
Sure. Thanks, Joel. I figured I would just go over the top 5 that we have listed and not sort of go into too much detail because I don't want to, just so we don't kind of, I think the sort of primary descriptions are what's most important. So these criteria are going to be used to assess projects that the borough puts forth and to sort of assess whether or not which ones we will decide to implement. So just sort of starting from the top. So the first criteria that we have is the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. This is the most important criterion. Without the reduction of planet warming gases, many of the other points in this criteria are moot. The second is conservation and preservation, specifically the conservation and preservation of resources, both in and out of Carlisle's boundaries, such as arable forest land, historic places and structures, and finite materials, rare earth elements, mineral resources, metals, rare gases, and fluid resources, such as clean air and water. This criterion should also include the reconstituting of land to expand green spaces in and around the Carlisle community. The third criteria is diversity, inclusiveness, and equity. Many community members of Carlisle face disparities in equity because of ableism, sexism, racism, colonialism, or economic hardship, to name a few. It is important that projects being considered not only include all members of the Carlisle community, but work to address these disparities. Progress name in the name made in the name of climate action will likely benefit certain demographics, it is important to consider who has the most to gain from each action being decided, who might be left out, and how it could exacerbate or amend current and historical inequities. Actions which correct injustices against marginalized groups should be considered beneficial to Carlisle as a whole and not simply as a benefit to such marginalized groups. Fourth criteria is public health and safety. Many of the plans and proposed projects will affect public health positively. Carlisle stands to reap many health benefits from climate mitigation. However, not all actions will improve this equally. Safety considerations should be made in regard to local electricity generation and the materials used in energy efficiency in electronic devices. Safety considerations should be made in regard to local electricity generation and the materials used in energy-efficient electronic devices, which can contaminate soil and water if disposed of improperly. Local economic development. This criterion examines the improvements that catalyze and foster economic development in the Carlisle economy. Specifically, actions that result in improvements to Carlisle's economic diversity, the financial security of small businesses, the cost of living for residents, along with the types of jobs and salaries available in the borough. So those are our top 5. And we're still working on a slew of more that will sort of just be additional criteria to look at.
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. If you look at the entire document they put together, you will quickly realize that they spend considerable amount of time identifying and describing why they should be candidates for criteria. The approach that we will use on the committee is as you are aware from my description of just the 6 projects we're focused on, I mean, it's quite a range of types of projects. So we will, in all likelihood, based on various factors and with consensus, may have slightly different criteria for different projects, but in combination of quantitative and occasionally qualitative ways, we will hold ourselves accountable to those criteria, and those will be reflected in any recommendations that we make to council. So I applaud the community engagement team's work on that. It really does fundamentally shape the choices we will make. Thank you for sharing that, Mitch. Did you have anything else you wanted to share with the group? Since we'll go around.
I guess maybe just a thank you to the Dickinson's Center for Civic Learning and Action. We just received a grant from them. I think it was close to $8,900, and we're going to be putting that towards conducting more public outreach, doing focus groups, and helping residents insulate their homes using thermal cameras and weatherization materials that we'll be purchasing for them. So,
that's really exciting. Congrats on that, and I'm glad you brought this. So I think what Mitch and his team showed by securing this grant is the ability for this committee to operate in different spheres. Obviously, we're going to have to rely on the borough and council to support a lot of our activities, but my charter to the members here is to really explore all avenues that are at our disposal to achieve our targets, because this is not a borough government plan. This is a community plan, and our approaches need to reflect that. And I think that's a perfect example of how we need to move forward. So thanks, Mitch, for that. Tony.
I don't have much to report. As far as Pathway Analytics goes, I have a handful of team members. My team's not very large anymore, in part because some of them have been put onto other task forces, but also because I don't have that many tasks for the group yet. And so I have kind of this core group that I can rely on for some of the technical work. Neil Leary in particular, Ken Schultes to some degree. And until we begin needing to contribute to some of the implementation plans for the 6 key actions and develop some perhaps projections of reductions or estimates of impact along some of these criteria, I'm kind of keeping them in a holding pattern at the moment. So that's where we are.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Tony. One idea I, very, very briefly mentioned that I think might be a good time for the Pathways and Analytics team to use, sort of, as we're not yet in the phase of really analyzing the alternatives coming, is to think about a dashboard, something that would be some a way of signaling on our website or social media, some way that people could go on and get a sense. When you have those campaigns for how close are we to our goal, the red clots and the thermometer. I mean, that's the most simple type of way of signaling where we're at. But we have, I think it would be really useful to think of some creative ways that we could signal sort of where we are on the path on different elements. And I'm always excited to talk more about how that might work.
Yeah, I mean, I think the difficulty is that even in the greenhouse gas inventory, right? So, for instance, use vehicle miles traveled as an example, right? We use statewide estimates and kind of scaled those down in making assumptions in ways that I think were plausible and that followed kind of best practices, so to speak, in terms of working with that state level data to come up with local estimates of vehicle miles traveled. But we just simply don't have good ways of measuring it on a daily, monthly, or even annual basis. And so I think if we wanted to, there are things you can do, right? We could set up traffic counters right at different parts of the borough and literally get measurements for weeks or months at a time and begin to see if local traffic is kind of, we know it follows seasonal patterns, but is at least, is it trending in any direction over time or not? So things that you could do that speak directly to some of the key actions where I think there would be an additional kind of data collection step needed before we could develop a dashboard to kind of be transparent about progress. But there are things I think that I'm thinking in the commercial and residential side where they're transactions that occur, and we need some sort of way of centralizing those and knowing that they're happening. I mean, there's residents doing weatherization projects and energy efficiency projects and installing new Energy Star appliances that we're unaware of. Do we have some sort of way of them telling us about it that we can advertise? And so maybe that is something we can think about a little bit more. Maybe we have to create some of our own data collections that we can monitor and we can be transparent about our progress.
I agree with all of that. So just to echo a point, our ClearPath tool that we use for our community greenhouse gas inventory is a tool that I would say is quite accurate in some areas and maybe a little bit more of an estimate that's not particularly unique and specific to Carlisle, but uses some aggregate data. I'll just make it. I think to your point, here's an example of where I think we can get more specific in areas that are not reflected in electricity use. Our ClearPath tool uses a regional formula for that the EPA basically generates based on the inputs they get from the generation sources that are in our area. So it's a pretty good tool, but relying on that tool to tell us how much rooftop solar we have in our community, we're not going to get that level of data. And that is an objective. So ClearPath is not set up to do that. We would actually depend on on some of our objectives, some specific ways of measuring that. And I think that's one example I can think of.
Yeah, no, you're right, and that's where our partnership with PPL would be important,
Yeah.
right? Because they know exactly how many homes in Carlisle have solar panels and are doing that metering. So,
Yeah, Mitch.
Oh, I was just going to say Stanford has like a project called Deep Solar. I don't know if you're aware of it, but they've got counts of like rooftop solar by area, angle, and azimuth by FIPS code. So,
To demonstrate potential.
no,
luminance
like
or-
actual. So they used
Oh.
satellite data to
Oh.
like count, solar panel area. So
Oh,
we
I
could look
see.
it up right now. How many
Okay,
are in the
Yeah,
project
that's-
currently.
that's great. I would love to make it. I would love to think our partners in PPL would, for our service area, would know in 17013 exactly how much capacity we have. But it's good to know there are other technical options, and so let me just amend a bit what my sort of challenge to you is don't limit. Don't imply that I want to limit us to like one standard. We'll only use one type of metric or chart. That we may want to, kind of mix them up a bit, especially as we're working on different projects. We may be able to come up with measurement techniques that are more accurate than what ClearPath could measure. So, yeah, I know there are probably a half dozen we could think of in a few minutes, but I would just challenge your team to kind of think through how we might do a better job, perhaps, or more accurate job than ClearPath does in some areas. So, but and I'm 100% confident you have the skills and expertise on that team to do that. Carla.
My group got a little downsized too, so there's a total of 3 of us at the moment. And like Joel talked about, we are looking for opportunities to create something where we would be doing that installation of houses and buildings, but in a way that would at least financially help those who need it the most. So a lot of the programs that are out there now are more based on here's some money to pay your bill. And because most of the people that live under the 200% poverty don't own their own homes.
Mhm.
So we're looking for more creative ways to get those energy efficiencies in and help them with their bills or so forth, lowering their bills by actually putting in the improvements, but then making it financially viable for those who need it, not necessarily the landlords. So that's a little trickier. But we're going to be looking into that and see what else we could find out there. I intend to talk to Cumberland County's South Central Community Action Program to talk about what their program actually does, and see if they have any ideas too. So
I cannot think of a single thing that I think is more important that can yield the greatest results and check off as many things as our criteria and hit every one than addressing energy efficiency and low income housing. It is the classic principal agent problem that economists talk about, because the agent is the landlord who is not paying the bills. There is no natural incentive for any member in that relationship to improve their efficiency output unless you incentivize them to do so. And it is absolutely a great place to focus on. And I really confident we can get some good partnerships with PPL and educating and it's amazing in the last 3 or 4 weeks how many experts and researchers are really promoting and educating on the value for overall decarbonization with heat pumps, with split systems that are becoming so much more efficient, and is on a dollar for dollar basis. It is one of the most effective ways, economically efficient ways of decarbonizing, is to make space heating and cooling improvements. So I think you're looking at the best rock to look under to meeting our goals. So I'm happy to help you with that, Brenda.
I was just going to note that in a meeting I had with Mayor Schultz and Borough Manager, we did talk about our American Rescue Plan dollars, as well as the fact that there are county level dollars as well, and we've a significant amount, and this is an opportunity. And of course, it will deplete, and we won't have it. So thinking of more of a return on investment, and so thinking of zero interest loans possibly for landlords. That maybe that would be that more of an incentive without it just completely depleting, but the fact that it would come back around, but there's zero interest on it. I will say that at Dickinson there was a zero interest loan for new homeowners, which I was able to buy my first house with that, and I was very grateful for it. And then I was able to move and have another, and so it really was that stepping stone that I needed. So I think that's, not all of our funds are going to go to something like that, but looking at other places that have those types of processes, and thinking about how we can creatively invest some of our dollars, and also think of how we can keep that momentum going years forward, as best as possible.
Thank you, Brenda. I almost feel like you were at our last team lead meeting, because we talked exactly in those terms about what might we do with a subset of those, and we talked about looking at ways we can use it as a revolving fund. The only other thing I wanted to add, what you said, which is a unique opportunity if we were able to leverage some of those funds for our goals, is we have a very unique opportunity to collect data and monitor outcomes where you don't always get that opportunity. So if somebody entered into an agreement with us, part of the conditions would be, we want to see what the effectiveness is. And sometimes that's really hard when you're working with utilities and proprietary data. You can kind of get around that barrier. And then we're able to say exactly what this subsidy or what this program did without, with complete accuracy. So that was another thing we got excited about. So thank you for that. Dave.
The task force right now consists of me and 2 other members, and I plan in the next week or so to get us together probably remotely is going to be easiest to start addressing the types of projects that would meet the two objectives. And I know that there's been a great deal of effort put in by the Dickinson students, particularly regarding the EV chargers in different locations. And so that's something that we've already got a bit of a head start on. So we'll start putting some details together to come to projects that then Mitch can begin to apply. Well, Tony can begin to apply the measurement techniques, and Mitch can apply the criteria, and we can move toward, I hope, in the early part of the summer, to have some view of a couple of well-ranked projects for each of the two objectives.
Yeah, I think two areas where will be particularly unique in some ways are areas that the borough manages and controls. So public lots, parking lots, metered parking, that sort of fits in some ways kind of in its own category. It's a very important part. The other is this theme of, and it's a big footprint in our borough, is multifamily housing, which I think kind of has its own sets of maybe optimal approaches that are different than the public lots. And then I think those are probably two good ones to start with, and then we start reaching out to the more single family home, row home sorts of footprints we have in the borough. So yeah, I think the mix and approaches may be quite interesting to look at, and look forward to what your group
Well, as you've said, the infrastructure bill has specific funding for electric vehicle encouragement, let's say. And so that's obviously an area that we ought to get to sooner rather than later.
I agree. Well, thanks, David. And again, our decarbonization task force is not assembled and doesn't have a leader yet, but we're hoping to close that gap soon. Yeah, I'd like to open it up to other team members. Maybe start with the deputy mayor. Anything else you want to add?
Sure. I wrote myself notes. Some of these are just observations or things to think. I don't know. Well, one thing you just noted about multifamily housing and about putting station or like EV charging stations there. We built the townhomes at Factory Square, and I live right across from it. And after it was built, I counted one day like 34 bikes there, and there's not a bike rack. So I think that there's this idea of like the jump, but also like just like meeting exactly what these folks are already lacking. And a nice secure. So the veterans housing did put in one bike rack, but it's less of the family dynamic. There are, don't get me wrong, I know the families over there because I hang out with them. But I think that those are some opportunities to think about. So again, it goes back to vehicle miles traveled. It goes back to like thinking of like how people navigate our town. The other thing with the EV, thinking both large because we have these opportunity with grant dollars, totally understandable, but also how, I don't know if these are possibilities, but there's bike conversion kits, which Hans Pfister has built many of them, and so I told him that next time he builds one, I want to like be there because I want to, because I don't really understand how to upgrade my own bike, but I want to be able to do that. So if small funding that could help that, step up for especially our lower income folks, and also have that know-how, that, supportive structure, life cycles in town here. Can you teach those mechanics to I think that there's a lot of there's the huge task at hand, and then there's looking at Carlisle specifically and thinking of the opportunities that we have here, the knowledge, the resources, all that kind of stuff. Even though we don't have our decarbonization task force lead here, one of the things was about putting solar on warehouses. And, I ran one of the sessions on Wednesday, and I was at your excellent session, and, folks talked about warehouses and I, I completely understand why they get such flack, but my neighbor, who I share a wall with, actually works at Master Brand Cabinets, and this sounds like an incredibly progressive company that is in our borough that I was not aware of. Progressive is in they have a large, dynamic, vibrant workforce of varied backgrounds. They took a half day and let people work a half day, but they would get paid if they stayed because they have a lot of Nepali folks there for Holi, for their, so there's things like that I think that if we understood, because I don't understand the different types of warehouses, the different types of big structures that are out in the western part of our town. But they have said nothing bad about this company, they actually got another family member to work there. So I would like us to sort of start really understanding what we have available to us, and then maybe we can meet a particular organization, business within our borough, and hold them to a high, point out why this group or why this organization should, other people should emulate their some of their practices. I don't know if they would be up to it, but that's who I was texting while I was like, what is the name of the and she's like, that would be great if they feel like, that company could be a good starting point. It's right on the edge. I believe it's in the borough. I'm pretty sure it looked like from the map.
Can you say the name again?
Master Brand Cabinets. It looks like it's a, let's see if I still have it up here. It's 219 Allen Road. But anyway, so I think that those are I don't know enough of all the different places out there so that's one thing that I think that we could do some research on in general and see if there's other places. But I would say maybe that organization could be a good one to start with, because they seem like they have some really great leadership over there that thinks creatively. Let me see what else I got here on my list. Mitch, sorry, go ahead. Thank you. I was like, it looked like it would. I was gonna ask you to look it up because I figured you would know better than I would. But thank you, ma'am. All right. Mitch, your criteria sounds excellent. I didn't want to, derail your conversation, but I think that's what I'm always thinking about, how we can hit as many of these touch points of checking things off. I would love if we could get the accurate VMT, because we've had this conversation before, vehicles miles traveled, and so and this goes back to the transportation area, and I know you know this, but maybe it's for the public discussion, is that I think a lot of people, when we hear these categories, it's, oh, you're talking about transportation, but transportation is built on the built environment. So there's lots of different ways that these things intersect, and so we have the ability of of bringing down our vehicle miles traveled by working with policies that base where businesses and homes and density and all those sorts of things. So I think being able to look at those, maybe they're harder to quantify on what you get, but I think in the long run, that's also how we change the dynamic of how we move around this borough. And I know that we're not Paris, but also if Paris, big, huge places can make these immense changes, I think Carlisle can do some too. Everyone's gonna get some flack. It's gonna be fine. There, I'm done.
We.
The pending, I don't know what the status of Bedford Street is,
Oh, yeah.
but taking a lane out of Bedford Street. I like the idea of parking, but the first thing I thought of when Mark Malloridge announced that was, that could be pretty cool to have a protected bike lane. And because I'm a bicyclist, and I'm more comfortable riding out in the countryside than I am riding through town, because the drivers just do not. Most drivers do not think we're supposed to be on the roadways. That's something that we really have to work on.
Do we know if Pennsylvania, I didn't think they passed it fully yet, the protected bike lane. So in PennDOT's laws, there is something that says you have to have parking within 12 inches of the curb. And that's why we can't actually legally build protective bike lanes. And so it passed one side, like maybe 20, the house, it passed the house, but it didn't pass the Senate. It did. So it's just languishing there. So, but these are things to consider. I mean, if we're going to change it right now, it would be hard for us to flip harder to flip, high in Hanover if that would ever change, because we have those nice bump outs, which help with pedestrian walking, but you'd have to figure out like having bikes go through there. So thinking about Bedford, is there a way that we could build it so that if that would change, like you could flip things around later? So I think that those are some things that I think we talked about, some things we can't move forward on our climate action because the state is a roadblock for us.
There are issues with that protected bike lane, putting it between the parking and the curb anyway, because as a bicyclist in a lane next to the traffic, at least when the drivers get out of the cars, they look to see, before they open the door, to see if they're going to crack their door into oncoming traffic. When the traffic is on the passenger side, there's people, they're just too used to opening the door on the curb and not having a problem. And depending on how much traffic you get and how aware they are of that, that's right.
Buffer.
Yeah.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, yes.
Well,
So it's a design thing, and you have to look at it road by road to see how much room you have. Yeah.
the only accident I've ever been on a bike has been on West or on Hanover, because somebody just wasn't looking, and they're not used. They're used to looking for cars coming down the road. They're not used to looking for bikes. And
I was hit by a car walking across the mid-block crosswalk at Weiss. So
yeah,
it was slow,
yeah,
but I fell over.
right. Well, just before we leave that conversation, I mean, I don't want to sublimate good ideas or projects based on this, priorities. Because we talked very, very briefly, maybe years ago now. We have other options that are a little bit more creative than easements on the railroad tracks. I mean, if you cut a line that the rail does across this borough, that's a great way to get across town. And if we could figure out a way of making that truly pedestrian friendly, bike friendly area, a way to get across town, I'm interested in that. So, yeah.
And the only other thing I didn't put down is, we have our goals here, the climate action plan, but we have council goals coming up, and so I'm definitely going to be pushing forward some things that might not be on the top 6, but so I think like having these things partnered and moving them forward in multiple ways shows the significance and the importance of things. But I'm also thinking exactly how Mitch was thinking with what things really check all these different boxes and move forward in a number of different areas that we're trying to have that opportunity. I mean, I recently saw that I saw some tweet and it was critiquing. Because I always like to critique my own party sometimes. But when Obama was in office and we had everyone was on the same political spectrum, they didn't push things through. And so like I think that we have momentum, not just politically as in like who's what your background is, but we have momentum from the borough, from residents, from we have scientists telling us what's going on, and how we can meet our objectives. And one of the things I brought up at the teach-in was these are the ways that you tip the scale at the federal level, or at least the state level, and up on forward is starting here and doing that work and showing that we can do it. So so I'm planning on bringing some fun things as well with council goals.
Just a note on VMT, the local government operation ClearPath model has a really, really good survey. They actually do VMT for all municipal employees, and you get a very precise estimate. There's no reason we can't replicate that survey and distribute it, ideally as randomized as possible. We may get a little bit of availability bias on that one, but still, it would probably give us we could probably leverage a really great tool to give us maybe a little bit better way of tracking vehicle miles traveled that are unique to the borough.
Do our traffic lights, like our cameras, have any of that information or any of the ability to track that information? It seems to be able to count a queue or figure out how far back cars are queuing. So I'm just wondering if those types of things are quantifiable. What I did realize when I talked to Rick Friedman, and our engineer, traffic engineer, he was able to tell me exactly why we could or couldn't give pedestrian lead times on our buttons, and we can like he knew the ins and outs of our technology. So I don't know if we've asked is
what I think it's the technology to track sorties or commutes for one vehicle might be a little bit limited. It's usually an assessment on a individual car, how what their average commute is. And then that blend of type, so you get categories of types of vehicles that have different emission profiles, because you can't monitor like every Toyota Camry, so you lump them into different groups. But if you get a significant number of respondees who have very precise information on their commute times, then you have a baseline that I think is a little, probably, if you have enough respondees, that's a little bit more precise and accurate for our purposes. Which kind of leads me to another thing. One of my ambitions, as I now have an entire class of graduate students at Johns Hopkins who have to do a project on doing a greenhouse gas inventory, I get to tell them what to do. And one of my ideas would be to do a local government operation greenhouse gas for for government operations here. I just completed one for the city of Manassas, so I'm feeling kind of cocky right now about our perspective to do that. But I think knowing what data is needed, it would be pretty quick, and I think you would. My understanding of how well we keep our records here, I think it would be easy to get that information together that we could then have them crank through ClearPath, which would just gives us another piece to this puzzle, because again, our greenhouse gas inventory is a community one, which is meaning it doesn't distinguish between municipal operations and general community operations. And so, I'm looking forward to leveraging free help who have to do it anyway to meet their requirements. So more on that later. I honestly think it's going to be a pretty low bar to get the data we need, and I think it'll be a nice addendum to our greenhouse gas inventory that because some of our objectives are municipal specific, we can actually showcase how well we're meeting our municipal goals distinct from our community goals. And I think that we want to do that because that is the one area we truly have control over is municipal ops. So more about that later. Didn't mean to spring that on you, but I think we've got a nice situation where we can minimize the work that you guys need to do and let just turn over some of the data. So thank you, Brenda. Jared, do you have anything for the group?
I don't have anything to add to this. I'm taking lots of notes. I probably have 4 pages of notes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I will say that the 5 items that you wrote down they're within the. I drafted some documents for the steering committee, and those considerations were in the documents that I wrote up. So I wrote a template for, the committees to give recommendations, and I wrote a template for a strategic action plan to sort of enable the borough to implement the climate action program. So
We all look forward to pulling those in, and I know you've had some personal experience, in your previous job with some of this, so we need to leverage every ounce of expertise we have to get this done. So thanks, Jared. With that, any alibis? Yeah, go ahead.
I just have a quick question, and this doesn't have to be answered now because I understand we might not have the answer to this yet. But just regarding the EV charging infrastructure, I guess one of my questions would be how much of borough funds, if any, will be used for installing them, and I guess how much state, how much federal, and then also is there any potential for the borough to generate revenue off of them?
I am, if you'll indulge me, David, I think that's TBD. I mean, I think that it comes down to the case you are able to make if matching funds yields certain efficacy to a certain group. So, and then I think we'll have to balance what amount makes the most sense. In consideration of many factors, I think not least of which there is a large tranche of federal funds that will get committed soon, and then that needs to be part of our consideration. I think so. But this is not going to be a recommendation that's going to live in the shadows. So next time we meet, I will expect that will come out in quite more detail, and that we'll have a lot of good debate and discussion about that. So bring that back next month. Okay.
Thanks, Joe.
All right. If there are no other alibis, thank you everybody for your time.
My other question was, when's our next meeting?
I hope. I was of the understanding and hope that until further notice, we will meet on the first Tuesday of the month at 6.
Okay. So it's May 3rd, 6 p.m.
In the Julian calendar, that is consistent with.
Okay.
So look forward. So great to see you in May. All right. Thanks everyone. This meeting is adjourned.